especially in my generation with the extreme access that we have to literally just publish our thoughts at any time of the day with no censorship or requirement of critical thinking, it's easy to get caught up in your emotions and not process them and even lie to yourself about what those emotions are, because we have an insane amount of mass media outside of just social media platforms. Like, you've got film and TV that are pretty much meant to be consumed now, right? A lot of the shows on these platforms are made for you to just click and do whatever in the background, but you're still internalizing these messages and it's still being recycled in your perception of the world. And from what I've noticed from since maybe when I was 13 to now, I'm 23, in a 10-year span, the media that is being pushed towards my generation for us to consume does not prioritize mental health, comprehension, or the exploration of it. Hi, welcome to my show, the Agentic Show. My name is Adriana Acosta, and I will be your host for the next 15 to 20 minutes. My show is going to be a conversational piece centered around creating dialogue around generational trauma, from the experiences of Black young adults such as myself and my peers, and the stigma surrounding mental health topics and exploring treatment. Welcome, Victor, to the show.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I appreciate you, Adriana, for having me on your show.
Thank you for coming. Can you give us a little intro to who you are, what you do?
Oh, okay. So my name is Victor. I hail from Oakland, California, and I am the program director for Energy Converters.
Amazing, nice. What got you into that career?
I've always been into education. It really started when I was in high school, but I'll save that story and just say when I got to college, I started taking classes in the education department as well as African American studies. And I was just really frustrated with how much I didn't learn about the history of Black folks when I was in high school and growing up. And so it made me feel like I wanted to be a part of the solution as opposed to taking that anger and using it productively, using it to push me to do something better and to be better. And so there's this quote by Carter G. Woodson where he talks about if you can control the way a person thinks, then you can control their actions. So that quote always stuck out to me. And so for me, I'm all about sharing information, sharing knowledge, sharing history. So I wanted to be a part of, helping students and helping young folks, find their agency and being able to talk and advocate for themselves, particularly through educational policy, right? Because education, the system is really important. The education system is really important.
Yes, I agree. I agree with all of that. And I also like that quote too.
Oh yeah.
Carter
G. Woodson, yep.
Who said it before, but I've heard a quote similar to that, but it was more so centered around emotions. If you can control a person's emotion response, them as well, or how they perceive things. I gotta find the quote. But what would you say? Would you say that your family upbringing, how you were raised and the values that you were raised with kind of instilled that trajectory for you?
Yeah, I would say that I was raised with my grandmother, and I saw what she did. I saw the way she interacted with folks in the neighborhood. And so I'm probably part of the last group of people who knew everybody on their block, could go to every one of their houses and get food from them. So I knew everybody. We called everybody on our block auntie and uncle, and there was just this level of kinship around the neighborhood. And so I seen how folks in the neighborhood would come, and my grandma was always giving them whatever they needed. They asked for food. She was always sharing, even places to stay. So I seen that from her, and I always knew that I wanted to continue to be that because I saw her being a giving person. So I think for me, giving back is super, super important. And I got that from my grandma, I would say.
So she was like a pillar in your community. Everybody knew her. She was the grandma to not just you, but everybody around her too.
Correct. Yeah.
That makes a difference. I definitely, I only know maybe like 2 people in my life that were like that, and they weren't my blood grandma. So I understand
See?
the impact for sure.
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
it makes a difference because there's a lot of people who don't have those figures in their life through their blood family or even chosen family. I feel like, yeah, that makes a difference. Getting to have that as your actual blood family is really, really cool. I don't think people understand the privilege of having someone like that in their family.
Hmm.
Give us a little background on your family outside of your grandma. What would you say those relationships are like?
I would say my relationship with my family is pretty good. So I was raised with my mother. I mean, my mother and my father. So I lived with my mother for like exclusively with my mom until I was like 10. And then I lived with my dad from the time on. So I kind of joke around. So kind of sort of like, have you ever seen the movie Boys in the Hood?
Yes.
Okay. So I kind of had a similar experience with as Trey. Not in regards to like, oh, I started messing up in school and then I started living with my daddy. So I could not that, but more
Yeah.
of like just being living with your father and as like your primary caregiver. So that was interesting. But it was good. Big
Wait,
family.
interesting how. So I don't have that experience, father, son. Was that
Yeah, yeah. It was good. And my parents had me when they were relatively older. So they were in their mid 30s and they'd already had kids. So I think they were kind of already used to what it looks like to raise children. And I
You're
think
the
for me,
baby?
yeah, so they weren't like overbearing. They kind of let me do my own thing.
Okay,
And
that's
maybe
nice.
it was because I think partially that had to do with them both only having girls.
You
And
were the
then like,
baby boy.
yeah.
Wow,
So
okay, yeah, that's different.
yeah, so I say interesting because I think a lot, and I don't like even playing into that stereotype of talking about it, but
Mhm.
I just say interesting because a lot of people around me, friends and some of my family members, like cousins and stuff, didn't necessarily have their father in their lives, if that
Right,
makes
that's
sense.
that's my life for sure.
Hmm.
So
So
that's
that
something I want to see, like, what's that dynamic
yeah,
like?
I
Yeah.
it was, so I would say like for me it was good. That's all I know, so I don't know what it looks like on that other side. Uh,
Right.
it kind of just seemed regular, and to me, to be honest, I don't know what would be different outside of I think. Yeah, I can't say anything different. I can't say anything because I don't know that other experience.
Right. You
I don't
only
know
know
that
what you
honestly.
know, and you don't
I
know
only
what you
know that
don't know.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know the difference, but I can make assumptions. But I guess it is. I guess when it comes to certain discipline things, even though I didn't really need that much discipline, I think it can be a different dynamic when you're hearing something come from like a mother and then when you hear something coming from a father, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
So
like
I
maternal
could assume,
discipline would be more, I think it's associated with more like physical punishment or something that reinforces masculinity. Would you say that's like along those lines, or it's a little
yeah,
different?
but I'm not even talking about physical punishment because I think I did grow up in an old school household. So my grandma, my aunties, my grandmas, my aunties, like I probably got more physical punishment from my grandma than I
Yeah,
did from
that's
my dad.
good. My mom did
So
not hold out on me just because she
yeah,
was a woman. That's for sure.
you know,
Yeah.
so I say that to say that like it wasn't like, oh, my dad was scared my dad was going to yoke me up or something. He never did that ever. Like he never did that. But I think just in like the tones and like the sternness, maybe sometimes and this is my assumption because again, I don't know. I have my dad with me, so I don't really have the other experiences. But yeah.
Yeah, just speak to your experience.
Yeah. So I'm just speaking to my experience. So my experience was just like we were cool. I think it was cool to like, I think having that father figure and having someone that you aspire to be like in some shape or form and like seeing that from the person that brought you into the world, I think that was a really dope experience. And we did. So, we could play basketball. He took me to like baseball games back when I was growing up. Like we would walk to the Coliseum. I'm from Oakland. So the Oakland Coliseum was really close to where we live. So we would walk and go.
Like a music venue, or is it like
No, it's
a?
a venue for baseball. It's a baseball venue. So
okay.
we would go to the baseball games, like we would go fishing. We did like all the like cool stereotypical like father son stuff. It was
Yeah,
cool.
like that.
Yeah.
You know
Yeah, we
that.
played a little catch. He taught me how to catch a baseball and all that. So like baseball was my first sport, not my favorite sport. It's my first sport that I played. So yeah. So I had those experiences.
And that's super valuable. I don't think major percentage of the population even experiences that relationship with their parents, whether it's father, son, mother, daughter. Um, and I think being able to have the ability to reflect on it with like warmth and like excitement really does make a impact on how you perceive your relationships going into the future and the choices that you make regarding those relationships.
Mm-hmm.
I also think having like that sense of security and safety with your, the first people that walk you through this life, your parents or your grandma in this case, um, really reinforce like your emotions and your emotional reflexivity, like how you're able to manage them, direct them, and process them as well. Have you ever heard anyone in your family say, I only cry when I'm angry?
No, I never heard nobody say that. I never heard nobody say they only cry when they're angry. That's not to say that they don't, but I never heard nobody actively, intentionally say, hey, I only cry when I'm
angry.
angry.
What does
And I've
that?
also seen all of my family, I've seen everyone cry.
Wait, say that again?
I said I've also seen everyone cry. So I would be like, you lying. If somebody told me that, I'd be like, you lying, bro. Bro, you lying.
You were angry. I remember when you cried. Yeah. I in my experience from my family dynamics, I would say the women in my family, I've heard them say this a lot. Which I also have all seen them cry, and I know it's not true. But
Right.
what's your initial reaction to someone who would say that? Like, oh, I only cry when I'm angry.
I think that's very limiting. And I think it limits them from like some human experience and human emotion, like crying. And I think that's something that we as humans should experience outside of like only crying when you're angry. Like sometimes people cry because they're sad, right? To be sad and to not cry when you're sad, which I think people do. I think they're probably just saying that. But to imagine if you were really, really sad and you didn't have that ability to let out that sadness with like crying and tears, I don't know how I would operate and move in life or navigate life. So when I hear it, I'm like, dang, that's really limiting to the experience of being human. And it must be very tough and very hard to only equate being crying with being very mad and angry.
Yeah, agreed. It's funny, while I was like drafting up some of the questions that I like wanted to prepare for this, I wasn't going to include this, but as I was writing my notes, there was a girl having a conversation and she was repeating that over and over. I only cry when I'm angry. And then would go on to explain like whatever she was frustrated about. I was totally eavesdropping. It wasn't my situation to be listening to at all. But she was right next to me. And I was like, this kind of relates to like the topics that I want to touch on with this show. And she was explaining to this guy that she was with, like, oh, this person, some like guy that she was seeing or whatever, was just kind of like playing games with her, running her around and all this stuff. And she's talking about how upsetting it was. And then she was talking about how she was crying over it. And I don't remember what the guy said, but whatever it said made her defensive. And that's when she started saying, oh, well, I only cry when I'm angry. And then the rest of her conversation was kind of just like, kind of taking back everything that she said, essentially, that upset her or, why she was crying and minimizing it to, well, I just only cry when I'm angry.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, especially in my generation with the extreme access that we have to literally just publish our thoughts at any time of the day with no censorship or requirement of critical thinking, it's easy to get caught up in your emotions and not process them and even lie to yourself about what those emotions are, because we have
Mm.
an insane amount of mass media outside of just social media platforms. Like, you've got film and TV that are pretty much meant to be consumed now, right? A lot of the shows on these platforms are made for you to just click and do whatever in the background, but you're still internalizing these messages, and it's still being recycled in your perception of the world. And from what I've noticed, from like since maybe when I was like 13 to now, I'm 23, in a 10-year span, the media that is being pushed towards my generation for us to consume does not prioritize mental health, like comprehension, or like the exploration of it. That's what, oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I'm listening. Sorry, I'm listening.
That's kind of why I want this show to exist, because I want, people my age and also people who are older than me who have more experience with healthy relationships, with unhealthy relationships, to kind of just talk about, this is how I process emotions in my life, and here's what's worked for me, and here's what hasn't, and here's what's influenced me, and here are parts that don't really, make such an impact on me right now. Just to have a better like understanding, but also understanding of every individual's world when it comes to their emotions, because our emotions really kind of build the foundation of the world that we walk in, right? Like, my 3D experience of life is not going to be the same as yours. My experience of spirituality is not going to be the same as yours. But I think if we have the same algorithm on our Instagrams, our external experience is about the same. We're being pushed the same content. We're engaging with the same content. We're talking about the same topics that mass media deems popular and important enough to talk about. But we're not focusing on how those topics make us feel, and if they make us feel anything, period. We're just consuming. So just to tie that all back, like, I want this show to really dig a little bit deeper on our experiences of life as an umbrella, but most specifically, like, how we process our emotions and how it impacts us.
You know what I will say is, I feel like for me, I have seen a lot more of folks wrestling with their emotions in real time on social media, which is very interesting, because I think sometimes older folks, people may be able to be like, why y'all taking all of your problems to the internet? Why y'all sharing everything on the internet? Yeah. But I think in some ways, while I kind of, to some degree, understand that level of thinking, I also think that it's interesting too, for that is the case, that a lot of folks are comfortable with like just sharing everything that's happening to them, what they're going through, what they're thinking, even those raw, ignorant thoughts too.
Man.
Just people are just sharing like, this is how I feel in this moment. And I think that's important, like, for us to be able to see that in a world that's right now is all about curating a look or a persona or a personality, like curating something that maybe just a highlight of who you are, but not fully who you are. I think that is important that people do that. And I think, while in some ways, because I don't think anyone, even before you all, had the tools or even platforms to be able to talk about and wrestle with what they're dealing with, in particular with their feelings. I don't think we've ever had that. I feel like social media gives folks an opportunity to do it, and you can possibly, I think people like you who are creating these spaces can build tribes and community around mental health.
Yes. Wish I had an applause button. Yeah, that's what I like try to engage in when I'm going on YouTube or any social media platform. Like, if I'm not on there to promote the work that I'm doing creatively, I don't want to be on there. Like, if I find myself on there, it is for that dopamine hit, like scrolling till I find something that like makes me laugh a little. But I had to scroll mindlessly, lose time that I could have been writing, reading, doing something much more stimulating, touching grass, going outside. I'm choosing to prioritize a platform that I know is specifically curated to evoke more negative reactions out of me. But even me being that emotionally aware does not make me exceptional to this rule. It's weird because I think my generation specifically struggles with this like pacifier phone complex more than any other generation before us. Like,
what do you mean by that when you say pacifier phone?
I can't go anywhere without my phone. I can't. Like, I've done it before and I felt fine, but it was the people around me that were not okay with it. I'm calling you, I'm texting you, you know, you can't just leave without your phone. And then when I'm like, well, actually, I wanted to, it's this whole thing. It's not like a whole fight, but it really is like this barrier of understanding. Like, I was raised, my mom was strict. So even though I did grow up in the digital baby age, like, you know, I'm just before the iPad kids, but I was almost an iPad kid if we had like iPad money when I was younger. But I did grow up around kids, and I remember babysitting kids when I was still young that were those iPad babies. Like, their parents don't care what you do with them. As long as you feed them, don't let them like pee on themselves, they can play on their iPad. And I was raised like I wasn't allowed to have a phone, a touch phone, until high school.
Touch phone.
Yeah, like I had a flip phone when I was younger, and I had, or I'm lying, my first touch phone was like that Sidekick. You know what I mean? That was my favorite phone.
So question, if somebody told you to, I just want to do this experiment because people talk about this. If somebody tells you to do like the call me on the phone signal, how would you do it? What hand gesture would you use? Okay. All right, cool. Because I've heard I heard some people use like younger folks are doing this because they never knew a phone that had this. I heard people like this, like I've seen videos of it, but I've never tried it in like the wild to be like, yo, if you're saying call me, what would you do? Would you do like, and they you do this, you go like this. Okay. But I'm thinking there's some because they don't know, they only know cell phones. They don't know house phone. It's just like, that's how they've always talked on the phone.
That's crazy. They're lying. They know this. They know.
Like, hey.
No, that's crazy. See this? Yeah, no, that's crazy to me. Whoa. No, yeah. This all the way.
Okay.
But yeah, my first touch phone was the Sidekick keyboard, and it did have a touch screen, and that was like my coolest phone ever. And then it wasn't until like middle school age where I started getting that Apple product brainwash. Like, you should get an iPhone. Everybody has an iPhone. If they don't have an iPhone, they have an iPod Touch. And then I would say that's when I acclimated more towards like the popular trends of my generation. But before, I was not allowed to have a phone. I was not allowed to have video games. With the exception of my Nintendo DS. My mom was very adamant about keeping me away from technology because there was a lot that she knew that she couldn't control once I had it in my hands. Like, you know, you go to school, you have at least the barrier of the firewall of the Wi-Fi. So you can go to school and go on the computer and run the internet, but, you know, there's a lot of child locks on everything there. At home, they didn't have like all the child protective features that they have now on devices. So you could pretty much give a kid an iPad and they could go down a rabbit hole of like serial killers in 5 minutes. And I think having that like overload of information and then also not having the comprehension of an adult, I think also impacted like people of my generation and how they process their emotions, because they were always overloaded with things that have strong emotional reactions, but they didn't have the comprehension for it at the time. Like I remember a couple kids that I went to school with, like this one kid was just like always left to his own devices. I don't know what his parents did for work or where they were half the time, but he was able to hack into things when we were really young. And he's like, I imagine today he would probably be your average like red pill guy, just because of the content that he was consuming when we were kids. But he had nobody telling him like, hey, take a break or don't watch this. Like, and he was an emotionally sporadic kid. I remember he had ADD or ADHD, but he would always have like, I don't know if this was related, to be honest, but he would have these like emotional bursts. Sometimes they were super like just positive, like kids having the zoomies or whatever, and then sometimes it was really negative, and he was really frustrated to the point where he was crying and he didn't even know why.
So let me ask you this: what has been your experience, your personal experience with both social media and like having a phone? Because for me, in high school, we were sidekick folks. So that was like AIM, and being on a sidekick was the extent of what technology was. And it wasn't until I got to college where we started getting iPhones like I was a junior in high school or a senior in high school when iPhones came out.
What?
So when iPhone first came out, and the only person that had an iPhone was one of my teachers initially. So, and I think I actually had the first iPhone maybe like some months later, but we didn't have iPhones. And then as I got to college, that's when iPhones started becoming more popular. And then as I'm graduating from college, this is when like Instagram starts to take over, because we had Facebook, but Instagram starts to take over. So I know so much more life. Like I knew Instagram when it first launched to like seeing what it is now. And you all probably didn't have that same experience in regards to like that young adult. Your young adult life has always been with like Instagram being a thing and being like a primary like center thing in like American life, but in the global life. So what has that experience been, and how does that affected mental health for you?
I would say it's had negative and positive impacts, but I couldn't weigh one more than the other right now. When I was so my mom was strict. I wasn't allowed to have social media as a kid, but that doesn't mean I didn't have it. I remember my friend introduced me in 5th grade to what Instagram was, because when Instagram first came out, it was not as like narrative and influencer-y based. It was very much like, I just want to show people these pictures and write a silly caption and no thoughts, no critiques, no analyses. Like there was no shade room. There was none of that BS. Like it wasn't a little gossip hub. It was none of that. It really was like just a collage of people posting photos. And it wasn't like, you know how now like people are like, oh, photo dump?
Photo dumps, yep.
In the first year or two of Instagram, every post was a photo dump. There wasn't a necessary like, this is a photo dump.
You couldn't even post multiple pictures at one point. You couldn't even post multiple pictures at one point. It could only be one picture. So
you had to do it separate. And so then there would also be accounts too where you could tell those accounts were just created to create like one big picture, like post like frame by frame by frame. There were accounts that just dedicated to like, I'm posting Donald Duck, and the account is like a big Donald Duck, and that's it.
A big Donald Duck is funny.
You know what I'm saying? Like the mindless accounts made back then were less about being harmful to other people. It was more so about like, I have a really dumb idea and no one's going to stop me. And this doesn't affect anybody else but me. Like, you know, like it was very much like kid friendly, which is crazy because I don't think there's any app like that now, unless it's specifically made for kids that is kid friendly. But Instagram at one point was. And then I don't know exactly when Facebook bought it, but I would say like the years leading to that is definitely when that environment changed. and was a little less, oh, ditzy, I do what I like and post my photo here and there, and more so about cultivating an aesthetic and upholding an image based off of the content posted on the account or the account owner. And it kind of became this like mini Hollywood of a platform. Because even the celebrities that used Instagram when it first came out were posting just like everybody else. There wasn't really like a competition of who has the better post or, you know, the most likes or stuff like that. You could freely comment. You could, I don't know if you could direct message like you can now, but it was harmless for a while. And then I would say once I was around 13, 14, I started going down this rabbit hole of like other content that was more dark. Like at first it started with like satirical, dry, witty jokes, like the stuff you would see on Curb Your Enthusiasm, but for younger people and more so a little like self-deprecating. And at the time, like I had watched SNL since I was like 9 or 10. When my mom would sleep, I was not allowed to watch it, but I watched it. So I was into like adult humor at an early age, but I didn't realize at the time, like getting older and like dealing with depressive symptoms, not knowing I had depression, engaging with that content with no restrictions, and then also just not the full comprehension of what I was engaging with was for sure negatively impactful. Like that part of my life, I did not know what I was doing. So I would say that's my experience with social media, negatively. Positively, once I was more aware, like once I was older, post high school, like going into college, and I was more aware of like my tendencies in terms of like negative thought processes or like negative self-talk, and then like content that I might have been engaging with that wasn't good for my health. I was able to find more accounts because now this is like post Facebook bought Instagram age. So you have a lot of different accounts with influencer type account owners that have their own niches. So their posts are like have one goal, one intention most of the time, if they're not like dynamic people and they're just using Instagram as Instagram when it first came out. I was able to find like much easier than a Google search, like resources on like different therapies like EDMR, or is it no EMDR? Yeah, EMDR, holistic therapy, different like diets and foods that you can eat to improve like your gut health, which in turn improves your mental health because your gut and your brain are connected. Like I was able to find a lot of those resources like way quicker using a social media platform versus like scouring Google, reading journals, articles, and the information that was dispersed was also a lot easier to retain. Like these people, these accounts are their income, so they're spending time creatively putting like a video together to best disperse the information, so it's not just like a list that you would read on psych website or WebMD. They're putting a lot of thought into the content so that you really retain it without having to come back to it. So I've actually really enjoyed seeing like social media take that turn. But I will say, like, for the most part, most social media platforms require your demographics for an account. So even when you go out of your way to create an algorithm that pushes this content, you are still fighting against an inherently racist algorithm that wants you to engage with shit like it wants you to engage with things like the shade room, or just like anything that they believe stereotypically you fit in within the demographic that is on your account. And I think when you're navigating an an emotional minefield that you don't even know is yours. Like if you're not emotionally aware of yourself and how you process emotions, that can be extremely harmful, because you're just going to engage with whatever's in front of you and not think more of it. And I think that's still kind of like the tendency today. Like I'll try to talk to my cousins, or like I would say most of my friends are like-minded, so I don't really have to like go into detail about it with them. But I would say with like family my age, trying to like initiate conversations about, just being mindful of like engaging in stuff. I'll be like, oh, they'll tell me something about like a rapper and their baby mama's drama, and I'll just be like, why is that interesting to you? Like, not in a judgeful or shameful way. I just want to understand how it relates to you. Like what resonates about this content with you that makes you want to share it.
Yeah.
Because I'm not interested in this stuff. So how do we relate? Where's the emotional connection for this with you? And if you can't describe it, do you think possibly it's like a repetition that you're just used to? And what about that repetition makes you feel safe? It's like, it really is kind of like breaking it down bit by bit. And I think I found with people who aren't emotionally open with themselves, they don't really enjoy that line of questioning, because most of the time it's not like coming from an interrogative stance. It just simply is like curiosity. And I think for me, what makes it easy for me to be a curious person is that I am open to negative and positive reactions, because I am confident of how I can handle those based off of my emotions and my emotional control or intelligence or whatever you want to put after that.
So I guess I would ask that, like, so as we kind of like wrap up, what would be some advice you would give someone else, like the younger Adriana, in regards to like learning how to, or the first initial steps to processing your emotions and regulating them in a way that's healthy?
I would say just be more creative and don't think twice about it. I think when I was younger, I was extremely like vulnerable to others' judgment of what I was doing, because I didn't know what I was doing and I was more aware of that as a kid. And then somewhere along the way, I got older and thought I knew what I was doing, and then I made mistakes, and then I remembered that I don't know what I'm doing again. And every time I try to cope with that in an unhealthy way, I feel shame about not knowing what I'm doing, versus when I cope with it creatively, like write a song about it, or just play with with people in my band, or write poetry about any mode that I cope with art, or creatively, makes me feel more sure of who I am, more so than of what I'm doing. And I think that's really the best you can do when the world is out of your control. I think I would just tell her, like, you might not be prima ballerina, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't continue to take ballet classes. Sure, you aren't going to go to Juilliard for theater, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't do an improv class, even if other people think it's corny. Like, do what works for you. This is something that you're pulled to every time. There's a strong emotion there that's beyond your comprehension, but you have experience in the past to tell you, when you engage with activities like this, by the time you're done with that, you understand your emotions a little bit better. And that's better than going over here because someone thinks it's cooler and now you're more confused with who you are. Go to where you're pulled. That's spirit. That's something that's bigger than someone else's perception of you, or even your perception of yourself.
So making sure that folks know, or understand like where they get positive energy from and leaning into that.
Definitely. And if it scares you, I think you should go for it, but it still needs to remain in a positive energy of fear, not, oh, I should go jump off a cliff for the adrenaline scares me, you know?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, this has been a good talk. I really appreciate talking to you and answering some of the questions and hearing you. It's interesting to see the different perspective in regards to our different experiences as we, I guess, grow up in adolescence, like as we're growing up into young adulthood, like that experience with technology is interesting. And I think that's one to be explored moving forward, because I think that's an interesting take. And not a take, but I think it's an interesting topic. And I'm not so sure how much folks really have those conversations outside of trying to say, well, my generation was better because we did this, or our generation was better because we had this, or we didn't have this. But just, so not having that kind of conversation, but literally trying to understand, like talking about those things so that we can understand each other to get that perspective, because I didn't grow up with that. So I have blinders when it comes to how I think social media should be used or how it affects folks, right? Because I know the time where it was, and I can only imagine what it would have felt like if Instagram was a thing when I was in high school.
Oh.
Or even if it was when I was in college, because it wasn't a thing when I was in college. It was just becoming a thing when I was leaving college. You know what I mean? So in those times where I'm super developing myself and like a lot more, and I'm not saying you still developing yourself in your 20s, right? But when I'm 17, 15, if it was more of that as opposed to what I was seeing on TV, I think it would have been a lot different. So I only said I think it's important for us to share those perspectives so we can understand how each of us are, dealing with this thing we call life, emotionally, physically, and spiritually.
I hear you. Yes, I agree with all of that. I definitely feel like I don't want to go as far to say like trauma, but I do think there's a lot of unpacked, like internalized messages that my generation has from growing up under such a heavy influence of social media and the influencer type thing. Just kind of, it is a beautiful thing to see things that I relate to now that I would have loved seeing as a kid, like happening now. I like that it's happening, period. But it's like these people who are like me have always existed, and my algorithm never pushed me towards that, even when I was looking for it. And I think that's something that outside of like a mental health space should be discussed, just because its impacts on racism. Like these apps are inherently racist because they're created by white men and they're biased. So I think that's worth investigating and exploring too, because racism on its own really does disproportionately impact our mental health compared to people who don't experience it. So.
Exactly. Well, I'm glad this is the right step in the right direction. And I'm glad that you are tackling or beginning to tackle and touch on these topics. I appreciate you.
Thanks for giving me the platform. You ever heard that thing? Like, I just needed the platform. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, that was Young Thug. That was Thugger. He said, I just need the platform.
I just needed the
platform. Me and my friend, we always talk about that, because we were talking about something like, I signed a messed up deal. I just need the platform. I already have the plan. I just need the platform. You already have the plan.
Most ever. It applies to everything.
Exactly. Well, just as we wrap up the Agentic Show, that's what Energy Converters is all about: giving young folks the platform to understand their agency and to make sure that you can, understand that you can do and be what you want to be. So, and be able to advocate for yourself. So, thank you for participating and being a part of Energy Converters.
Yes, thank you, Energy Converters, for the platform. No bad deal. No bad deal.